For 20 years, I worked overtime and weekends to give my wife Linda and our twin daughters the best life possible. I never complained about the long hours because I believed we were building something together. That illusion shattered when I accidentally saw a text on my wife's phone from her boss, Richard. Last night was amazing. Your husband's still clueless. The betrayal cut deep, but nothing prepared me for discovering my 16-year-old daughters, Amber and Zoe, had known about the affair for months and helped their mother hide it from me. Before I tell you how I discovered my entire family had been lying to my face and what I did about it, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal. I met Linda during our sophomore year of college. I was studying engineering and working part-time at a local hardware store to cover tuition. She was pursuing a business administration degree and caught my eye during a campus fundraiser. Linda had this infectious laugh and ambitious spirit that drew me in immediately. After our first date at a cheap pizza place, we became inseparable. Those early years were tough financially. After graduation, I took a job as a site engineer at a construction company while Linda finished her degree. I picked up extra shifts and weekend work to support us, never minding the long hours because we were building our future together. When she graduated, we got married in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. We were young in love and ready to take on the world together. Our twin daughters arrived 2 years later. The pregnancy was unexpected, but became the greatest blessing of our lives. Holding Amber and Zoe for the first time in the hospital, I promised I would always protect them and give them the best life possible. Linda took a year off to care for them before returning to work at a small marketing agency. I stepped up even more, taking overtime whenever it was offered to make sure we could afford the better school district and all the extras growing children need. Over the next 15 years, I worked my way up from site engineer to project manager. The hours were long and I missed some school events, but Linda always reassured me that the girls understood Dad was working hard for the family. We managed to buy a nice 4-bedroom home in a good suburb, take annual family vacations to places like Disney World and the Grand Canyon, and eventually enroll the twins in Westlake Academy, a prestigious private school that promised better college opportunities. 3 years ago, Linda landed a position at Premier Marketing Solutions, one of the top firms in our city. The job came with a substantial salary increase, which allowed us to renovate our kitchen and start a proper college fund for the girls. Linda worked directly under Richard Maddox, the Executive Vice President of Client Relations. From the beginning, she talked about him constantly. Richard was recently divorced, drove a Tesla, and had a reputation for lavish client entertainment. She described him as brilliant, innovative, and connected to everyone who mattered in the business world. I was happy for Linda's success, but noticed subtle changes in our home life. She began staying late at the office 2 or 3 nights a week for client emergencies. Weekend workshops became more frequent. Her wardrobe underwent a complete transformation from practical business attire to designer suits and dresses that cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. When I commented on the expense, she explained that presentation was everything in her new position and that Richard expected his team to project success. The twins, now 16, also began changing in ways that concerned me. They became increasingly focused on material things, constantly comparing their possessions to their classmates at Westlake. They spent less time with me and more time shopping with Linda or attending events where Richard was sometimes present as Mom's boss. They developed a particular interest in his beach house in Florida, which he had apparently shown them pictures of during a company family day. I tried to maintain our family traditions like Sunday morning pancakes and monthly camping trips, but increasingly found myself alone in these efforts. Linda would be too tired or have work to finish, and the girls would make excuses about homework or friend commitments. Our dinner conversations became dominated by stories about Richard with Linda and the girls sharing inside jokes about him that excluded me entirely. Still, I trusted my family. When doubts crept in, I reminded myself that Linda was just enjoying her well-deserved success, and the twins were going through normal teenage phases. I focused on being supportive and keeping my increasingly frequent concerns to myself. I was the proud husband and father, never the suspicious one questioning every late night or new expense. The dynamic shifted dramatically during a family dinner last February. Linda had prepared an elaborate meal which was unusual, since cooking had become my responsibility as her career advanced. The twins were excitedly discussing spring break plans when Zoe mentioned possibly going to a beach somewhere. Maybe Richard would let us use his place in Naples, Amber suggested, looking at Linda with a knowing smile. Richard is very generous, Linda replied, giving our daughter a warning glance that I did not understand at the time, but we should plan our own family vacation. Richard said his beach house has a private pool and is right on the water. Zoe continued, either missing or ignoring her mother's signals. That is enough about Richard for one evening, Linda said sharply. Your father works hard to take us on nice vacations too. The awkward silence that followed stayed with me for days. It was the first moment I consciously acknowledged that something felt very wrong in my family, though I had no idea how deep the betrayal actually went. March 15th was supposed to be a normal Friday. I had a meeting with contractors scheduled for the afternoon, but it was canceled last minute when the client requested design revisions. I decided to head home early, thinking I might surprise Linda with lunch, since she had mentioned working from home that day. I pulled into our driveway around 11:30 and immediately noticed her car was gone despite her calendar showing no appointments. The house was empty and quiet in a way that felt ominous. I tried calling her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Telling myself there must be a reasonable explanation, I made a sandwich and sat at the kitchen counter to check some emails. That is when I noticed her laptop was open on the kitchen table. Linda was usually meticulous about closing and locking her computer, a habit she claimed was required by her company's security policies. The screen showed her email inbox with several unread messages, including one from Richard with the subject line, "Last night." I had never snooped through my wife's private communications before. For 20 years, I had respected her privacy completely. But something about that subject line, combined with all the small inconsistencies of the past months, compelled me to click. Linda. Last night was incredible. The way you looked in that red dress at dinner, I could barely wait to get you alone afterward. The hotel suite I booked for next week is even more luxurious. Make sure Buster thinks you are at the Chicago client meeting. Your girls are amazing for covering for us last weekend. Smart like their mother. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely scroll through the rest of the email thread. Their exchange included details of their 3-month affair, hotel confirmations for nights when Linda had told me she was working late or at conferences, and intimate photographs I can never unsee. In a daze, I opened her calendar and found dozens of entries labeled client meeting or team dinner, with small asterisks next to them. Each corresponded with nights Linda had come home late, sometimes smelling of unfamiliar cologne she claimed was from hugging clients. The physical evidence was overwhelming, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered next. When I checked her text messages with our daughters, I found dozens of exchanges that made me physically ill. Linda. Need you to tell Dad I am staying late at office tonight. Actually meeting Richard at the Grand Hotel downtown. Amber got it. Should I say, client emergency again? Or team project this time? Linda. Mix it up. Thanks, sweetie. Richard got you those shoes you wanted, by the way. Amber. Oh my God. Seriously. The Louboutin. Best mom ever. Another exchange with Zoe was equally devastating. Zoe, Dad. Asking where you are. Said you promised to be home for dinner. Linda. Tell him work emergency. We'll make it up to him. Zoe, done. He looked sad but believed it. When are you going to tell him about Richard? This is getting weird. Linda. Not yet. Complicated situation at work. Richard says he can get us access to his beach house this summer if we are discreet. Zoe, worth it. That place looks amazing in the pics. The messages continued, revealing months of coordinated deception. Both my daughters had received expensive gifts from Richard, including designer clothes, the latest phones, and even concert tickets. They had covered for their mother dozens of times, making excuses to me while she was with her married boss. The most painful message was from Amber to Linda after I had apparently asked too many questions one evening. Dad is so clueless. Richard is way more fun anyway. At least he notices what shoes I am wearing and does not talk about boring construction stuff all the time. I sat alone in my kitchen for hours, reading and rereading the evidence of my family's betrayal. The pain was physical, a crushing pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been a carefully constructed lie. The wife I had worked overtime to support, and the daughters I had sacrificed for, had been laughing at me behind my back, trading their integrity for material things from a man who was destroying our family. My first instinct was to confront Linda immediately, to call Richard, and threaten him to demand explanations from my daughters. But as the initial shock began to subside, I realized a different approach was needed. If they had been calculating in their betrayal, I would be strategic in my response. I spent the afternoon copying evidence, taking screenshots, and downloading relevant emails and text messages. I forwarded key communications to my personal email, including financial records, showing Linda had recently opened a separate bank account where she was transferring small amounts of money each month. Then I cleared my digital tracks, closed her laptop, exactly as I had found it, and went to our bedroom to pack an overnight bag. I would stay at a hotel that night, claiming a work emergency of my own to clear my head and plan my next steps. I could not bear to look at my family knowing what I now knew. As I was packing, I noticed a receipt on Linda's nightstand for a dinner reservation at our home for the following Friday. It was for 8 people and included a note about dietary restrictions for someone named Patricia Maddox. The final piece clicked into place. Linda was planning to host Richard and his wife, along with others, at our home. The audacity was stunning. By the time Linda and the twins returned home that evening, I had composed myself enough to play along. I listened to their fabricated story about shopping and grabbing dinner together, nodding and asking appropriate questions while feeling completely detached from the strangers who stood before me. "Everything okay?" Dad Zoe asked, perhaps noticing something different in my demeanor. "Just tired," I replied. "Big project at work." "You work too hard," Linda said, kissing my cheek with lips that had been on another man. "You should take some time off soon." "Actually, I have been thinking about making some major changes," I said, the only honest statement I would make that night. The next 2 weeks were the most challenging of my life. I maintained a facade of normalcy at home, while systematically preparing for what would come next. My first step was consulting with Thomas Jensen, the most aggressive divorce attorney in our city. I brought copies of all the evidence and laid out the situation without emotion, as if discussing a particularly complex construction project. In 20 years of practice, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of infidelity I have seen, Thomas said, after reviewing the materials. The financial impropriety is concerning too. That separate account suggests she is planning an exit strategy. Further investigation revealed Linda had accumulated nearly $20,000 in her secret account over the past 6 months. Thomas also helped me document that Richard had been using company expense accounts to fund their rendezvous, including meals, hotel rooms, and gifts that were logged as client entertainment. "This is not just a personal betrayal," Thomas explained. "It is a corporate ethics violation that Premier Marketing would take very seriously. Executives have been terminated for less." With Thomas handling the legal preparation, I turned my attention to finances. I documented all our marital assets, secured my personal belongings and important papers, and opened a separate bank account of my own. I reduced contributions to our joint account to cover only essential household expenses, explaining to Linda that a project delay had affected my bonus structure. The hardest part was continuing to live with my family while knowing the truth. I sat through family dinners where Linda would casually mention working late the following week. I listened to my daughters discuss expensive items they wanted, knowing they expected Richard would provide them. I watched them exchange glances when I suggested family activities, their silent communication, excluding me completely. One evening, Amber approached me about summer plans. "Mom mentioned we might go somewhere really nice this year," she said, studying her freshly manicured nails that I had not paid for. "Maybe Florida. Florida would be nice," I replied neutrally. "Any particular reason you want to go there?" "The beaches are supposed to be amazing," she said quickly. "And the shopping. It is expensive," I noted. "But maybe Mom's boss could help us find a good deal since he has a place there." Maybe she agreed, a slight flush coloring her cheeks as she avoided my eyes. "Richard knows all the best places." "You seem to know a lot about Richard," I said. "Just what Mom tells us," she replied, suddenly interested in her phone. "He sounds cool." These interactions strengthened my resolve. My daughters had not just been caught in the middle of their mother's affair. They had become willing participants in the deception, prioritizing material benefits over honesty and family loyalty. While gathering evidence and preparing legally, I also met with my parents to explain the situation. Their support was immediate and unconditional. They offered their guest room for as long as I needed it, and reminded me that family meant standing by each other through difficulties, not betraying trust for material gain. The most strategic element of my plan involved premier marketing solutions. Through professional connections, I arranged a confidential meeting with Patricia Maddox, Richard's wife, who had recently reconciled with him after their brief separation. She had been completely unaware of his affair with Linda and was devastated by the evidence I reluctantly shared. Richard swore he had changed, she said quietly after reviewing some of the less intimate messages. He begged me to come back, said he had learned his lesson. I am sorry to be the bearer of such news, I told her sincerely, but I believed you deserved to know the truth just as I did. Patricia was not just Richard's wife. She was also the daughter of Premier Marketing's founder and sat on the board of directors. Her influence would prove invaluable in what came next. My final preparation involved coordinating timing. The dinner Linda had planned for Friday would now serve as the stage for my carefully orchestrated response. The guest list included Richard and Patricia, two other executives from Premier Marketing, and their spouses. Linda had been preparing all week, cleaning the house obsessively, and planning an elaborate meal. It is important we make a good impression, she told me repeatedly. These people are very important to my career. I understand, I assured her. I want everything to be perfect. For once we were in complete agreement, though, for entirely different reasons. Friday evening arrived with a sense of inevitable confrontation. Linda had spent the day cooking and arranging flowers, periodically sending the twins to the store for forgotten ingredients. I offered to help, but was shooed away with instructions to just look presentable and be charming. I dressed in my best suit and helped set up the dining room as requested. Linda seemed pleased but nervous, checking her phone constantly. Around 6:30, she pulled me aside with an anxious expression. Richard just texted. He is coming a bit early to discuss something work-related before everyone arrives, she said. Could you keep the girls occupied upstairs? This is confidential company business. Of course, I replied, knowing exactly what kind of business they wanted to discuss. Take all the time you need. When the doorbell rang at 6:45, Linda smoothed her dress and went to answer it. I deliberately waited in the kitchen listening as she greeted Richard warmly. Their voices moved to the living room, growing quieter. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I texted the twins to come downstairs, then walked into the living room where Richard and Linda were sitting suspiciously close on the sofa. They jumped apart when they saw me, Linda's face flushing with guilt. Richard, good to see you again, I said calmly, extending my hand. Linda has been talking about this dinner all week. Buster, he acknowledged with a firm handshake and the false confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Looking forward to it. You have a beautiful home. Built with years of honest hard work, I replied meaningfully. Something I have always valued, honesty. Before either could respond, the doorbell rang again. Linda looked confused as the other guests were not expected for another 20 minutes. I will get it. I offered, walking to the door and opening it to reveal Patricia Maddox, accompanied by Harold Winters, the Chief Ethics Officer of Premier Marketing Solutions. Patricia, Harold. Linda's voice was high with surprise. I thought you were coming together with Richard. Change of plans, Patricia said, coolly stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Harold and I had some company business to discuss with you and Richard, privately. The twins came downstairs at that moment, stopping abruptly when they saw the gathering in the living room. Amber immediately recognized Richard from company events and smiled broadly until she noticed the tension in the room. Girls, I said calmly. Perfect timing. We are about to have an important family discussion. Please join us in the living room. What is going on? Linda demanded, looking between me and the unexpected guests. Buster, what have you done? I have done nothing but discover the truth. I replied, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Something all of you have been keeping from me for months. The room fell completely silent. Richard cleared his throat and attempted to take control of the situation. Look, Buster, I am not sure what you think you know, but what I know, I interrupted, is that you have been sleeping with my wife for at least 3 months, using company resources to fund your affair and bribing my children to help cover it. Up. I removed copies of hotel receipts, text messages, and emails from a folder and placed them on the coffee table. Richard's face drained of color as he recognized his own communications. These are private communications, Linda protested weakly. You had no right to. No right, I laughed without humor. You forfeited any claim to privacy when you conspired with our children to lie to my face day after day. I turned to my daughters, whose expressions ranged from shock to shame. Amber. Zoe. Did you or did you not help your mother hide her relationship with Richard? Did you or did you not accept gifts from him in exchange for lying to me? Their silence was confirmation enough. Zoe began to cry while Amber stared at the floor. Richard. Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled rage. Is this true? After everything we discussed during our reconciliation, Richard trapped his eyes, darting between his wife and Linda. Patricia, it is complicated. The situation with Linda evolved unexpectedly. It was never my intention to save it, Harold interrupted, stepping forward with a folder of his own. Mrs. Maddox brought some concerning information to my attention regarding misappropriation of company funds. Our investigation confirmed that you, Mr. Maddox, and you, Mrs. Walker, have violated numerous company policies and possibly several laws. He placed termination papers in front of both Linda and Richard. Effective immediately, you are both terminated from Premier Marketing Solutions. The company will be pursuing restitution for misused funds, and this matter may be referred for criminal prosecution depending on the final audit findings. Linda collapsed onto the sofa, all pretense of composure gone. You cannot do this. I have worked too hard. This will ruin my career. You did this to yourself, I said quietly. Every time you chose him over our family, every time you taught our daughters that lies and material things matter more than integrity, every time you made me feel inadequate while laughing behind my back. Richard attempted one last defense. This is a personal matter that has nothing to do with the company. You cannot. It ceased being merely personal when you used company resources, Patricia interrupted coldly. The board meeting tomorrow will address your severance package, which I assure you will be minimal given the circumstances. The twins were openly crying now, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. Amber stepped toward Linda. Mom, what is happening? What does this mean? It means actions have consequences, I answered when Linda remained silent. It means our family, as we knew it, is over, and we all have to deal with the fallout. I turned to address everyone in the room. I have filed for divorce. The papers will be served on Monday. Given the evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct, my attorney advises that Linda should expect minimal alimony. The house will be sold and assets divided according to the court's determination. You cannot do this. Linda finally found her voice again. Anger replacing shock. The girls need stability. We can work this out. The time for working things out was before you involved our children in your affair, I replied. Now we will all adjust to a new reality. The girls are welcome to live with me once I secure a new place. Or they can stay with you and experience the consequences of prioritizing luxury over honesty. The remainder of that evening was chaotic. Richard and Patricia left almost immediately, their marriage clearly headed for a second and final dissolution. Harold stayed long enough to explain to Linda exactly what evidence the company had gathered about the misuse of funds. The other dinner guests were called and told the event was canceled. Through it all, I maintained a calm that surprised even me. The weeks of preparation had given me time to process my initial emotional response. Now I was simply executing a necessary plan to extract myself from a toxic situation and teach my daughters a vital lesson about integrity. As the dust settled, I spent time talking with Amber and Zoe, who cycled through denial, anger, and eventually tearful apologies. I made it clear that while I loved them unconditionally, rebuilding trust would take time. They would also have to adapt to significant lifestyle changes, including transferring to public school and losing access to the credit cards Linda had provided. Dad, we are so sorry, Zoe said through her tears. We did not understand what was really happening. You understood that you were lying to me, I corrected gently. That should have been enough to know it was wrong. The following months were difficult, but necessary. Linda moved in with her sister after the house was put on the market. The twins initially stayed with her, but moved in with me after a few weeks, finding her depression and constant criticism unbearable. Richard never contacted any of us again, having lost his job, his wife, and his reputation in one evening. I found a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment and started rebuilding my life with simpler, more honest parameters. The twins struggled initially with their reduced circumstances, but gradually came to appreciate the value of authenticity over appearance. 1 year after that fateful dinner party, we have reached a new equilibrium. Linda has found entry-level work at a small agency and seems to be slowly rebuilding her career. The divorce was finalized with terms favorable to me given the circumstances. Most importantly, my relationship with my daughters has evolved into something more genuine than before. The beach house in Naples would not have been worth it. Amber told me recently, as we were cooking dinner together, a new tradition in our smaller home. Nothing is worth what we put you through. That moment of insight made all the pain worthwhile. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come through the hardest experiences. I lost a wife, but gained authentic relationships with my daughters, who now understand that integrity matters more than material possessions. Have you ever had to stand up to people who betrayed your trust? How did you find the strength to demand respect rather than accept deception? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and rebuilding with dignity. Do not forget to share this video with someone who might be struggling to find the courage to value themselves when others do not. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most authentic beginnings.